Now that the news of Total War Arena ceasing operations has been made public, I think now might be a good time to take a look at how Arena came to be, how it was, and what it could have been, from the person who has been there from the very early beginning. So, what is Total War Arena? For those who don't know, Total War Arena was Creative Assembly's attempt at making a MOBA of their own, with a Total War spin on the genre, merging strategy and the existing MOBA elements into the same game with, instead of champions or heroes, we would command historical commanders and 3 units, and so creating interesting combinations. Every commander had 3 abilities that was unique to them, and units had their own strengths and weaknesses. With a 10-player pool, it resulted in a very fun and cathartic gameplay, and on high levels, into a very competitive experience. The game was structured very similar to World of Tanks in terms of progression. 3 in-game currencies, 1 for experience, 1 for in-game currency which is used for replenishment and consumables, and 1 premium currency. When you progress through the equipment of a unit and gained enough experience with your commander, you could progress to the next tier, where units get stronger, or even change a bit, or even change their subtype of a unit. It featured a lot of historical figures as commanders, such as Germanicus, Julius Caesar, Alexander the Great, Hannibal Barca, Vercingetorix, and quite a few more with an ever-growing roster, as well as civilization type, each with their own strong units and playstyles. Since you controlled 3 units, and thanks to the unit type ability, unit types of a faction, you could make some very interesting but still thematic combinations. So there was a lot of room for experimentation on every level of the game. Sometimes most unexpected combinations would end up being meta, such as Kanane, who is marked as an archer commander, and for a time Kanane was the go-to commander for pikemen thanks to one ability that was available to them. So let's look at the history of Total War Arena. Now that we know what Total War Arena was, let's take a look at its history and find out how a game got shut down before it even left its beta stage. You see, Arena actually was being alpha and beta tested on Steam, but then went down for an indeterminate amount of time, which ended up being, I think, a bit over a year? Well, a long time in game history. That is quite a problem and a speed bump for a game that was announced when Rome 2 Total War was released in September 2013. At the time, we were told that CA would have 2 teams. One focused on making traditional Total War games with a single-player focus, and the other working on a new title, which was Total War Arena, which would be multiplayer focused. In fact, those who had pre-ordered Rome 2 would even be offered special cosmetic goods and goodies for Arena, which was how I had learned that the game was out for public back when it was on Steam in 2016. There was also an invitational closed alpha live event at ESL, where famous Total War players were brought in to play the game for the first time. Some big Total War clan members, YouTubers, were brought in to test the highly anticipated follow-up to Shogun 2 multiplayer success. After a while, this period where the game was available on Steam was commonly called the Steam Days, and during later the wargaming period. People from Steam Days would often recognize one another. During Steam Days, the game was a bit rough. The graphics were worse than they were at wargaming, pathfinding issues were plenty, a few bugs such as famous ledge bug where ranged units would be able to shoot with incredible accuracy at enemy unit for a damage bonus and still shoot when the unit could not be seen by players. Artillery was much more deadlier and was the centerpiece of the meta, and in general created very campy battles on high levels of the game. Some mechanics were more obscure, such as knowing which unit would damage the other when they charged head-on to one another, but even with all those problems, there was a greatly designed game at its core that had tremendous potential. That is when the first Total War Arena clans started to emerge. Most were Total War, old Total War clans, who were playing the game semi-professionally at that point. After the alpha, the game was still firmly under CA development, but people were pointing out how similar the progression was to wargaming titles. The patches were regular and mood of the players was generally positive. With matches having a 15-minute time limit, it was a great game if you were coming home from work just to chill and relax for a bit, thanks to the command delay that is inherent to Total War games. The micro you needed to be successful was very reasonable and would have a cap, which I feel like what had raised the maximum age for the competitive scene of these games. Majority of the best competitive players I have met in this game were way over 30, which is the usual age micro-intensive game players retire because they simply cannot keep up. Going back to the topic of the Steam beta, during beta the patches were also frequent and the monetization was clear. Most arguments against the game could be dismissed as, relax guys, it's still in beta. However, there were some question marks in players' heads. What about the pathfinding issue that CA simply cannot solve? Where's the community support for the competitive? It was all a bit in the air. After the news broke that Total War Arena was leaving beta and was going to be inaccessible while they do some major rework of the game, would be back after some time, it was first speculated to be 3 months, then to 6 months, but, well, 6 months became a year became, I don't know, as long as it took, I guess. At the end, the population was dwindling because even though the game had potential, there was just not much content. After you reached tier 10, there was no incentive to continue to play casually, and there was no ranked mode, and tournaments were hard to announce because there was no community space to begin with. There were, of course, small-scale tournaments, but at best they could have in-game awards, but support for them was minimal. CA was more focused on developing the game, and the community was left to its own devices. During this time, some clans went into hiatus, some went to the other games such as World of Warships. So, for the Wargaming relaunch, on November 2016, Sega announced that they will be handing the reins of Total War Arena to Wargaming, and that there will not be able to use most of the old code and will have to start from scratch. However, a lot of the old models and designs were complete, so after a year or so the game would be back in alpha, which is basically what happened. The players who played on Steam were receiving closed alpha keys to play the game on the weekends, and there was great excitement that the game was back. Most of the problems were fixed, the new units being added. During that downtime, there were some major changes to the game. Commander abilities were changed from 4 to 3, and some abilities went from one commander to another. Some in the community complained that it would make the game easier, but it was to make game more streamlined and less complex to play. After the release, the changes were well received, and some redundant abilities such as defensive and offensive testudo being merged into one ability made the game a much better experience overall. The test weekends were these big events where people would take time off their work to play the game and level up their accounts, even though they knew very well that it would be reset when the alpha opened. I would like to make a footnote here that during this time, the first major tournament took place without the developer's intention. As such, it was called the Underground Tournament. There were no rewards and no way to even create a lobby, but we made it work. The way it happened was during those weekends the CA would announce some challenges, and the top players would receive rewards such as a real-life helmet, a few memorabilias, but one of them was to ask questions directly to the developers and gain access to the Super Test server. This server was normally reserved for CA's Q&A team to test the game with everything unlocked. A user named Anley Tung had won one of those competitions and got one of those codes. He then contacted me and told me that the code he used was reusable and could be used to create infinite amount of accounts with full access to the game. On June 24th, 2017, so he had gathered 20 best players he could find for tournaments, which ended up being Russians versus the world, because 10 of the players were Russian. The best part is, we could have been busted at any second of that tournament and could have had our accounts banned, but still it was completely worth it. Fortunately, we were never caught, and it remained a rumor for over 6 months in the CA office, and that there was a video of the whole thing. Yes, there was. And that video was mine. And I shared it with the players and later CA after we made sure we would not be punished. Because it was a goldmine for feedback. I mean, you've got some of the world's best players playing this game, testing it on a very high level, 20 versus 20. I mean, and for hours at an end at zero cost, yes please, that's a goldmine right there. So during the alpha period, the game is back on and people are excited. But the game was, according to the feedback I had, was inferior in many ways. Even I was considering not coming back. The graphics were inferior, the effects were inferior, new bugs, old pathfinding problems were there. There were also pacing problems. The game felt slower, which I actually liked. In time, however, all of them got patched. The models and graphics improved, battles became more strategic, and the balance was a bit more on point. There was still a limited access and marketing for the game, but hype was there. And community was growing it, you know, it was growing to become a major thing. And it was growing even though it was, you know, only accessible in the weekends. We had a lot of action on the forums. And so during the open beta, and the beta most certainly felt like the longest and the most exciting period. Frequent developer feedback, a patch every 2 weeks with major changes, developers working closely with players, clans flourishing, you name it. I have split these periods by the community managers, because it also happened that the game's support for the community had changed at the time. It was always great, I mean the support was always great, and I think that all of the community managers did a great job. But it all felt to me like different eras in that short period of time. So during this time with the first one, the Wargaming Community Manager Acreon would help us organize tournaments, and that was when first tournaments took place, which was the live stream tournament that I myself played in, and you can find the commentary on my channel. Tournaments were successful, but not without their hiccups, and they provided valuable feedback for the developers. The Community Forge program was launched, where the community creators would get featured and clans would be featured. One day, however, Acreon had decided to pursue other projects and we all said our goodbyes. In general, he was considered quite exceptional, considering he was the community manager during Rome 2 times, which were not a time you wanted to be a community manager at all. So while Acreon was in charge, Sasha would also be there to help out with lots of other things. We all knew Sasha because she would also play with us and even participate in trainings once in a while. During this time, while Community Forge was cancelled, a more direct communication with content creators was made. And most important event, which I think the Rise of the Commanders tournament took place. The tournament was a great success, which got a bit overshadowed by some of the problems in referees, but in overall it was a lot of fun and great teams competed, as well as the first pro gaming dramas were had. The whole team worked hard to learn from it, and they did. However, we would not see something like that ever again. Sasha would also stream her own games in the Arena Twitch account, which were always quite enjoyable. Sasha continued to be the community manager until the end of the premium unit controversy. So what is this premium unit controversy? An important footnote, I think, in Total War Arena history was the premium units. Until that time, the premium units were always advertised as a great way to farm currency, but they would never be as good as a fully equipped unit of the same tier. Then came a patch to make them a bit stronger, which we did not mind because they were really falling behind in a lot of ways. And then came another, which sneakily put some of those units on par with fully equipped units. You see, premium units were not just inferior versions of the same unit, but they also had their own specialties. Some had unique abilities that were cool but would be considered OP, or would have faster speed, or was of a type that was not available to that faction otherwise, such as Greek javelins. And javelins were only available to Romans and Carthage. Or Roman archers and archers were only available to Greeks and barbarians. The community fought hard and pushed back this pay-to-win method, where, you know, the premiums were tested to be better than the fully equipped standards by a wide margin. I myself have made some comparison videos and the premium units at this period, they were completely banned from tournaments. But even then, they could be used for ranked tests at least. In the end, the outrage was too much and premium units were brought to a more reasonable level. However, it felt like something had broken between CA and Wargaming, and I should say, this is just me speculating at this point. Now, let's talk about some of the other features that the game had, such as the rank system and leaderboards. There was a brief period when CA tested the ranked battles, and it was quite fun, albeit unbalanced because it was a bit too unforgiving. Were to get the top rank, you would be matched with the middle or bottom of the matchmaking. And so the matchmaking problems became glaring when one team would match a team that was full of their counters and nothing else. It was still a lot of great fun, but after the tests it was taken down, never to be replaced again. Leaderboards, on the other hand, had a quasi-elo system and were for tier 10 only. A lot of competitive people protested them because they only cared about win percentage, I mean the leaderboards, at the start, and then they were changed. This was, of course, exacerbated the major issue for casual players at the time, which were the four-man parties, who would just demolish the opposition because they were coordinated and more experienced than the average player. When you had those on one team, people would usually just quit the battle. I should mention that this was indeed a problem for casual play. However, the fix would never come because the fix would require a ranked queue, and sadly that never came. And comes the final days. During this time, Josh became the community manager. He was always a cool guy. He would make sure to keep community informed with the war rooms about the patches and the stuff that they were working on. Tournaments continued and some rewards would be given. Sadly, it was short-lived when the game shutdown was announced at November 22nd. Before that time, the population was already dwindling and finding games would become harder and harder. So, let's talk about what went wrong. Why did it fail? I think there are three major reasons why the game failed. The first and the biggest one is the marketing. The series at its core was always a niche product. It is hard to learn and hard to advertise for. I think the main problem was the lack of marketing push for the game. Sure, it was there in Gamescom and there were some ads here and there, but there were no events that established the game as this is what we are here, we are proud, and we are here to stay. Like, there was no events like that. They said they were going for esports crowd, but then where are the official tournaments? So any esports team that were attracted were immediately put off by the lack of officially supported tournaments. In contrast, look at Dota 2. Few ads, more tournaments, and bigger prize pools. Hardcore players are walking billboards for your game. So the player count would drop, but I think this was only one of the major problems, which brings us to the second problem. No community support. The game had a great community, but it was very limited in number because after forums had shut down and it was switched to Reddit, it suffered from the same drawbacks of Reddit, but did so even on a bigger scale. There were no community features within the game, so if you want to find people to play with, you could add them as friends, but no voice chat. And the only existing one being the official Discord, which was also community run, thanks to Ardes and his team, by the way. You could not see the clans, their standings, anything. Clans would have hard time recruiting people, and most people did not even know about the clans. Some clans would have problems with recruiting, and established clans would hog all the recruits. I know that Sansu clan could at sometimes would have so many recruits that I would not see them more than once or thrice, and we would still have a full training room. And I also would like to add a big thanks to Ardez and his moderators team for managing the Reddit. They did a great job, especially with the tools that they were given, and especially when the official forums basically moved to Reddit. A lot of people had doubts, but I feel like they came through quite well. And that brings us to our third problem: not enough endgame content. This one is quite clear. After Tier 10, there was very little reason to continue to play. Leaderboards were meaningless, there is no ranked mode, tournaments were hard to advertise. Hell, I would hear about tournaments mostly from Reddit if I were lucky enough to see them, or more likely from clanmates who happened to see those, which is a privilege that most players did not have. In past 3 to 4 months, I honestly stopped playing except to train with my clanmates or to play tournaments, which were also very tedious in the picking phase and could easily take over an hour just to pick for a 15-minute game. There could have been a simple clan wars with a map or even a score system, so many things that could have been done that were never done. A fun game, the core of your content will hook people up, but you need those potatoes to your meat to fill people up and keep them engaged, just like World of Warcraft or League of Legends did. A solid core gameplay and community, but just the community-based support was just never there. Which brings us to our conclusion. And as I write this down on November 23rd, I can only think about the great journey the Total War Arena was, which was the thing had made me start my channel with Narag and Roman, but also great clanmates and friends that I had made along the way. I would say most of them were closer to me than my own family, and it was a bond forged in hardship. We were battle brothers, and are still friends on so many other platforms. Even if I might not talk to some of them as often, their memories live on, and I know I can call upon them when needed even years down the line. Arena was the game that fit with my gaming philosophy because it was a game that challenged many skills that were needed in real life, and made me, and I know many others, better versions of themselves, which I think why it's a great tragedy that this game is going away. But life goes on, and we will move on to greater things that serve this philosophy even better. We will, as Arc Strategy, will be covering other games. The first episode of our Stellaris gameplay series is almost done. I'm still trying to figure out how to make the Magic the Gathering content more interesting to people who are not familiar with the game. We will probably do a Yu-Gi-Oh sort of thing, using a lot of pauses and commentary to explain the cards. Other than that, please let me know in the comments what games you would like to see more gameplay commentary and guides for, and I will try to see what I can do. As always, remember, this is not the end of the road, and our friends live on with us. And as long as we keep in contact, we can still reform our awesome teams to fight newer and stronger enemies. As always, thanks for joining me, and we will see you next time.